There you hear it. All his university people are making way. My brother and friend, Professor Samuel Egwu. Welcome.
Thank you. The President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Ahmed Bola Tinubu, who is not physically present, and the Vice President who is representing him, the SGF and other government officials who are present. I don't want to ridicule myself by going through a protocol list that I cannot manage well. I therefore want to skip that and go to my presentation. I think the SGF's address captures all that one can say about the importance of today, so I won't do that. But I would like to tell or speak to three important issues about democracy before I go to the presentation, and I'll be very rapid. I won't take a lot of our time. The first one is that everything about democracy is about struggle, it's about contestation. And I think the fact that citizens of this country fought consistently, to revalidate June 12th, and to also insist that we need to set aside and make it Democracy Day, points to that element of struggle. But I think of democracy in terms of contestation around its meaning, around its practice. And if you look at the literature, there are more than 3 types of democracy. So just to point to that, important issue. The second one is that democracy cannot survive unless there is commitment on the part of citizens. And when I talk about citizens, I'm talking about leaders, elected leaders, because they are also citizens. I'm also talking about followers, because they are also citizens. But what I really mean is that what you require to sustain democracy is democratic citizenship, whether you are a leader, whether you are a follower, so that you show commitment to the values, the enduring values of democracy, which includes negotiation, which includes consensus building, which includes trade-off, and so on and so forth. The third point, and I think we need to bear this in mind, so that we are not carried away because we are celebrating 26 years of democracy. And that third point is that, and you can go to the global arena to understand what I'm saying, is that democracy is not a unilinear journey. There is nothing to suggest that you can move rapidly and smoothly from point A to the last point. Democracy itself is challenged by internal contradictions. In fact, if you read the literature today, they're actually talking about the contraction of democracy. The kind of enthusiasm we had in the early 90s has waned. People are now talking about democratic backsliding. And I think we need to guard our democracy. Let us not assume that it will progress on a smooth journey. And so this is why vigilance is important. I miss the fact that the president himself is not here today physically, but he will hear this story. For me, the most defining moment for Nigeria's democracy, going back to 1999, happened in 2003, when one of the major parties in this country became so comfortable that said it will rule this country for 60 years. But what the president did, which I want to speak to, is what happened in the 2003 general election, when the AD, the Alliance for Democracy, was uprooted from all the states in the Southwest, with the exception of Lagos. And I said to myself, If Lagos gave way in that year's election, democracy would have died before now, because it is Lagos standing still and the then governor using that survivor to rebuild the party, then move to another party, and then reinvigorate that party in the Southwest. That was a singular factor that preserved multi-party politics at that time. And I think he will remember this, that it was a great service to democracy. Your Excellency, the Vice President, I won't spend a lot of time, and there are 3 objectives that I'm going to speak to in this presentation. The first one, I'll focus on and pay attention to key progress that we have made in our electoral democracy since 1999. The second one, I'll highlight the struggle of democratic governance with the twin challenge of national development and nation building since 1999. In fact, my own understanding that the 2 most tragic failures of post-colonial Nigeria is a failure of development and nation building. How has this democracy struggled with it? The third one, I will simply outline the key economic and governance reforms that are needed to consolidate this democracy. I then move to the general introduction of my presentation. I'll start by saying that we don't have debates in this country about what we want to achieve as a country. The ruling elite of this country, military, civilian, already have a consensus on what is national development. And if you want to understand, go back to the second National Development Plan document that spoke very well about the need to create a just and egalitarian society, a land of brightness and opportunity for its citizens, a great and dynamic economy, a free and democratic society, a just and self-reliant nation. If you put this together, what it tells us is that our country is supposed to be built as a social democratic society where equality of citizens is guaranteed. And that is why the Chapter 2 of the 1979 and the 1999 Constitution are very clear. The chapter that talks about fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy. If you read the Chapter 2 of our Constitution, what it envisions is the realization of what I call social citizenship. And for me, that chapter is more important than Chapter 5 on fundamental human rights. Because if you don't have access to opportunities and be able to do 1 or 2 things, Chapter 5 becomes meaningless. So, and I think we need to bear this in mind. And that is why, until the mid-1980s, when structural adjustment program was introduced, this country ran as a state-led process of capitalist modernization. But we have done that. Market reform took over in 1986, and we have remained with market reform. And I think for good reasons. For those who have read that era of state-led process of modernization, you could see elements of waste, you could see corruption, you could see government inefficiency, and you can see entrenchment of patronage politics. These things are well documented. I don't need to go over them. But if you review the SAP era, you will agree with me that it didn't help many African economies, including our own, where industries disappeared, where the value of the domestic currency became thoroughly weakened, and so on and so forth. And Nigerians, like other African countries, in that context of wanting to transit from that economy or society where government held everybody down, decided to support democratization. And that is why we have been in democracy since 1999. But I think there are other issues I want to draw attention to, and that I will just take the last one, and that is the whole problem of absence of national unity and integration. It doesn't matter to people, what it means to be a Nigerian. A pan-Nigerian identity is lacking. People talk about their ethnicity. Sometimes they talk of their indigeneity. But let us remember that all these things are about political exploitation of our differences. We need to live the spirit of one Nigeria that is focused to be a leading country in Africa in this century. Mr. Vice President, having said this, I'll simply talk about democracy since 1999. There are a few things I want to point to. Regardless of theoretical positions about democracy, democracy has a simple meaning. It presupposes the type of government or political system ruled by citizens. And democracy is underpinned by certain non-negotiable values. And this includes substantial individual freedom of belief and opinion, the right of all adult citizens to vote and to run for public office, genuine openness and competition in the electoral arena. There are many more that I don't want to go into. Now, if you look at democracy, election is a key marker, and I think we have done well since 1999. Particularly since the electoral cycle of 2007, when even before results are collated, the president is announced. I think there has been a lot of improvements in our election. We have seen alternation of power since 2010 at the national level, and many cases of alternation of power at subnational level. We have seen peaceful transfer of power, because this is exactly what democracy needs to do for Africa, because that's where the African crisis begins. Once you have sit-tight leaders that don't want to go. So democracy in this country has brought about respect for tenure of office. And I know the fight in 2007 when Nigeria said, no, there must be respect for that constitutional limit, to terms of office. At the same time, I think we have made progress, but there are also challenges. And if you talk to Nigerians, they talk a lot about the deficit and lack of public trust in our electoral process. Sections of the political class and civil society are very, very bitter that this is not the type of electoral democracy we need. But I said, particularly with respect to the 2023 general election that has been taken to the cleaners, that there are many things we forget to understand about that election. And what is that? That election, for the first time, resulted in the most diverse parliament. In that election, about 5 governors were stopped from going to Senate. In that election, there were many successful cases of mandate protection across the country. In that election, technology did a lot in terms of intervention, so that even as we complain about 2023, we need to realize that democracy is a journey and that we have not done badly and there is room for improvement. Now, one of the things that Nigerians have never debated, and I simply want to raise it, but I won't discuss it, and that is the fact that we are practicing the type of democracy that is called liberal democracy. And this type of democracy has become a global project. That is why the IMF and the World Bank, that's the one they are driving, that's the one they are supporting. This democracy has a major weakness because it's really not about democratic accountability to citizens. And that is why, for a democracy of this type to work, you need a very strong civil society, you need citizens, and so on and so forth. But a time will come that we need to debate the type of democracy we need as a country. Now, the overall consequence of what democracy has not been able to complete with the task of development is what you see in the big human security problem of this country. A section of my paper has actually outlined those. Because I don't want to waste time, I will simply mention a few of them. How come that a country so endowed with resources, with human capacity, and with good people will today have the largest deposit of poorest people? Is something we need to think through. This country has been declared the poverty capital of the world. This is something that I think is not good for us. And we have less population than China and India. And then look at the percentage of people that are in extreme poverty. Look at fragile state index and all other key indicators of development. We are not doing well. And that is why we need to reinforce our democracy so that we can address these challenges. And my point is that all the problems I've outlined are not problems you can attribute to the regime in power today. It's a cumulative consequence of the failure of post-colonial life. And all of us must feel guilty because we haven't done what we need to do to address the key challenge of development. And for me, to go forward, what we need is paradigm change in terms of governance, in terms of our democratic politics, and in terms of statecraft. But also, more importantly, we must address frontally the question of economic reform. And that is where I get to the third part of my presentation. And I think I'm more than halfway through into my presentation. So endure me a little. Now, in May 2023, the president of this country announced the removal of fuel subsidy. That was quickly followed by the unification of Naira's exchange rates with the major currencies of the world. Now, I read the Afrobarometer report on this. And Afrobarometer says that a large majority of Nigerians disapprove of the government decision to remove fuel subsidies, with more than half calling for their reinstatement, even though at the expense of other key sectors, such as health and education. But the point is, when it comes to dealing with this problem, it is not about populist gestures. What you require is courageous decision-making, bearing in mind the trade-offs that are involved. So, the point is that there was no way, if you were realistic, that you will continue, particularly when you are privy to reports on the corruption that has attended to fuel subsidy regime in this country, and the fact that the target people don't even get to benefit from subsidy. But we must be able to confront corruption at another level, because even countries that tell us to remove subsidy give subsidy. They give subsidy. But that's not the real point I want to make. My point is, yes, these two policies have done a lot in terms of increasing the cost of living for many Nigerians, especially the low-income households. And of course, it has driven inflation primarily by escalating food and fuel prices, and foreign exchange volatility was also a key problem at the beginning, but this is stabilizing. Now, we have seen a lot of positive outcome from the reform. So even if you were an extreme critic of the reform 2 years ago, you need to be a bit sober, and I'm relying on government official statistics about what has happened in the context of the twin reform that we are dealing with. I won't go into the detail, but we have seen growth in the economy. And without growth, you can't tackle poverty. Growth is good. The problem with growth is when it is not inclusive. So once you are achieving growth, you have crossed the first bridge. The second bridge is how to make this growth inclusive. How can you address the problem of poverty? These are the kind of things that you then, and that is why I think a lot has been done. In the last 2 years, we have heard about reviving scholarship for students. I went to school in my days on government scholarship, but it disappeared. So this is becoming something that I think we need to support and introduce transparency into that process, because it will solve problems, particularly for people who came from my type of family background. We have also seen remarkable impacts of deregulation in terms of making money available to support poor households. I'm talking about what we have achieved in terms of national cash transfer program in the last 2 years. We have seen in health and social welfare benefit accruing to Nigerians. Revitalization of primary health care centers. Women are enjoying free access to cesarean operations. We have seen economic diversification in this country, with non-oil exports accounting for a huge part of government revenue. We have seen wage reform. I see youth corpers, they are now earning 77,000 per month. And my son who entered camp today will also enjoy. So I'm very happy about that. And you can go on and talk about the benefits of the reform. So the problem is not that we have reform, but it is to be careful. You know, I studied the World Bank, I studied the IMF, and they have a language about reform that is very sexy. They kept on telling us that post-colonial Africa made a choice between two roads, one wide, smooth, but leads to disaster. And that there's a narrow road full of thorns and leads to eternal life. If you are familiar with the Bible, you know exactly where this is coming from. So they said, Africans chose that wide road, and that's why we entered political perdition. So they now tell us to choose that road that is narrow and thorny, because there's life, or, you know, we win at the end of the tunnel. It is very interesting to do reform. It is interesting to ensure that government doesn't carry burden that is not supposed to carry. But we need, as a country, to strike a delicate balance between the neoliberal agenda and economic nationalism. It is important to listen to the advice of the bank and the fund, but at the same time, stick to those things that will lead to national redemption. You need to think more about obligation to your citizens and loyalty to your citizens. And I think this is where the commitment of the president, that by the time I leave, everybody will enjoy the benefits of change. That is why it is something we need to stand on, and that is something we need to put more pressure on him to deliver, because that is the only way we can strike a balance between the neoliberal agenda and the dictates of national economic survival. And I'm so convinced that the president has this kind of image, you know, to leave a legacy for himself. And that's why we need to think about what we need to do from now. Yes, I've seen impressive figure in terms of revolution in agriculture, but I think we need to do more for a country, because these are comparative advantage. If Rwanda can depend on foreign exchange from agriculture, we are in a better position to do this. And I think the president's effort in terms of combating insecurity, and I saw the impressive statistics about that. If you don't do that and focus on that, our local farmers may not be able to enter their farms. You know, the Minister of Information comes from Niger. Some of the things I read while I was in Niger was very frightening, that farmers have to pay a fee to bandits and they give them receipt for payment before they can enter their farm. You cannot win the battle against food insecurity. And I think this is something we need to support and also do so with little consideration for the rights of those who are driving insecurity. That is where I differ. And I think we need aggressive industrialization in this country. The government is doing well in terms of tax reform. This is impressive. Nobody thought about this. The fact that there are multiple taxations in this country has driven away many people. But when you do industrialization, revive the basic industries, you can actually provide employment and take millions of people out of poverty. Then tax reform will yield higher return from a production-based economy. I'm getting to the end of my presentation, Mr. Vice President. I just want to say that, yes, we are a federal polity, and in the name of federalism, states claim autonomy. The president did well with the local government reform. When I go back to the 1976 local government reform document that tells us that we need genuine local government that can be a learning school for politicians, that can undertake key development activities which are lined up in the Constitution. I then say, why did we allow local governments to disappear? So reviving local governments and giving them autonomy is good. But I think we can move beyond that to support a program of local governance, which is more than functional local governments. You know, where you need to create real partnership between local government institutions, civil society and community people, and the state governments to put money into one basket to drive development, which they can all, you know, co-supervise and ensure accountability. I think we need this. I'm also worried that, yes, if you look at the 36 states in the country, there are pockets of government effectiveness, but there are many states where governance does not happen. You can't develop a country. It's not the responsibility of the federal government alone. And we need to leverage on the strength of federalism and intergovernmental relations to connect the three levels of government to drive development. And if you do not do that, the state assemblies cannot even checkmate the governor. And that is why I think the president of this country needs to put all his weight behind autonomy for state assemblies in the ongoing constitutional reform agenda, because that will change the narrative of governance at subnational level. I think this is something we shouldn't play with. I read impressive story about what the EFCC has done in terms of anti-corruption, and I think the kind of money they have collected back from those who stole is more than what had happened in previous years. That is good. And there's one phenomenal example of one individual that had 753 duplexes, units of duplexes, which the EFCC has already collected back. This is impressive. But we need more than that. What we need is a comprehensive anti-corruption program that brings citizens, civil society, and those institutions together, while we focus on reforming those institutions and creating more capacity for them to do their work. 2 minutes, I'll go away. As I said, we need to safeguard our democracy. I am reading the book by David Runciman, How Democracy Ends. And I'm seeing Trump and the far right in Germany challenging the basic tenets of democracy. It's a warning sign that we do everything possible to safeguard our democracy. That's why we are celebrating. We need to support economic growth, but we need a reform agenda that helps us to be more equitable society. But more importantly, I want the president and his cabinet and those who are ruling this country to go back to the commitment they made in the APC agenda. That is a very, very powerful document that looks like being lifted from chapter 2 of the Constitution. If we do that and drive governance and reform, this country will be a different country altogether. I thank all of you.